Yamashita's gold. Does the lost treasure of WW2 really exist? Picture this. You're hunched over in the steamy jungles north of Baguio, your fingers clawing through earth and roots, every bruise and blister a testament to your obsession. For Roger Roxas, the lure of Yamashita's gold wasn't just legend, it was salvation. Rumor has it, this vast fortune, plundered across Asia during World War II, could be worth over $100 billion today. After 10 relentless years of digging, Roger finally spots something shining in the mud. Could this be the mythical trove he's chased his whole life? But here's the twist. A ruthless rival lurks in the shadows. Ferdinand Marcos, one of the most feared leaders of the 20th century, wouldn't hesitate to snatch such riches for himself. As Roger's dream tantalizes him, danger closes in, and every step forward marks him as a target. What would you risk to seize unimaginable wealth and outsmart a tyrant bent on stopping you? 1. The secret of Yamashita's gold, Japan's hidden war treasure. By 1942, as the Imperial Japanese Army surged through Southeast Asia with brutal force and military precision, they initiated one of the most audacious and methodically executed looting campaigns in modern history. This covert operation did not merely aim to dominate territory. It sought to dismantle the economic backbone of entire nations. Under the shadow of war, vast fortunes were extracted and systematically seized, a staggering accumulation of wealth now famously remembered as Yamashita's gold. With an estimated value of over $1 trillion, this legendary treasure represents not only immense financial power, but also a chilling reminder of the human cost of imperial ambition. At the heart of this massive operation was a secret project codenamed Golden Lily, masterminded by Prince Chichibu, the younger sibling of Emperor Hirohito. Far from a traditional military officer, Prince Chichibu had spent years studying at Oxford University, and his Western education combined with his aristocratic authority made him uniquely suited to orchestrate such an elaborate endeavor. His role blended strategic command with scholarly foresight, giving the operation an eerie efficiency that left few traces, except the devastation it wrought. Golden Lily's operatives were not limited to targeting national treasuries or central banks. Their scope was far more comprehensive. Teams were dispatched across conquered territories with detailed intelligence on high-value assets. Museums, private estates, ancient temples, art galleries, and even illicit black market networks were all within their grasp. The looters took anything of value: gold bars, diamond-encrusted artifacts, religious relics, rare manuscripts, and exquisite artwork. Anything that could be monetized or melted down was fair game. Their knowledge was chillingly exact, down to knowing which monasteries housed sacred golden Buddhas and which private vaults held family heirlooms passed down for generations. But the question of how to conceal and transport such enormous quantities of plundered wealth presented its own challenges. To erase any trace of ownership and origin, all gold was melted down and reformed into standardized ingots, now bearing Japanese military or imperial insignia. This not only simplified transport, but also ensured that the stolen assets could no longer be traced to their original countries. What emerged from the forges was gold that, at least on the surface, appeared to be of Japanese origin, its history sanitized by fire. The Philippines soon emerged as the nerve center of the entire operation, with its geographic position at the heart of Japan's rapidly expanding empire. The archipelago became an ideal transit hub for warehousing and shipping looted treasure back to the home islands. Hidden tunnels, underground chambers, and secret vaults were constructed or repurposed throughout the Philippines to store the growing mountains of treasure. Entire cargo fleets were assigned to transport this wealth to Japan, running under high-security protocols that rivaled modern intelligence operations. For a time, the logistics ran like clockwork, and Golden Lily functioned with unnerving efficiency. However, as the war dragged on and the tide turned in favor of the Allies, the Golden Lily operation began to crumble. Air superiority shifted, and Allied submarines targeted Japanese shipping routes with devastating success. Numerous ships loaded with treasure were sunk en route to Japan, their cargo lost to the ocean depths. Some treasure caches hidden within the Philippines were buried hastily as Japanese forces faced retreat or annihilation, their locations known only to a handful of officers, many of whom did not survive the war. Following Japan's surrender, these buried and sunken treasures gave rise to decades of intrigue, speculation, and controversy. Treasure hunters, historians, adventurers, and conspiracy theorists have since scoured islands, sifted through archival records, and even ventured into deep-sea expeditions, hoping to unearth the truth behind Yamashita's gold. While some claim to have found portions of the treasure, verifiable proof remains elusive. The alleged involvement of post-war intelligence agencies and the possible use of recovered gold to finance covert operations during the Cold War have only added layers of mystery to the story. Today, Yamashita's gold remains one of the most tantalizing legends of wartime looting, an enigma that symbolizes both the depths of imperial greed and the ongoing human fascination with hidden wealth. As new leads occasionally surface and technology enables deeper exploration, the ghost of Golden Lily continues to haunt jungles, tunnels, and ocean floors, whispering promises of a treasure lost in time and a legacy history has yet to fully uncover. The Tiger of Malaya and the Lost Gold of the Philippines. In the sweltering heat of June 1942, amidst the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean, history pivoted in a matter of days. Near a speck of land known as Midway Atoll, the Imperial Japanese Navy clashed with American forces in a brutal confrontation that would forever alter the trajectory of the Second World War. Over the course of just 4 days, the United States Navy struck a lethal blow, sinking 5 Japanese warships, obliterating 270 aircraft, and sending over 3,500 Japanese soldiers to their graves beneath the waves. From that moment, Japan's dreams of domination began to unravel. The once invincible grip it held over the Pacific slipped, with supply lines shattered and the high seas crawling with Allied ships and submarines. Japan could no longer safely transport the unimaginable wealth it had plundered across Asia. Gold bars, priceless artifacts, rare jewels, all spoils of conquest. What was once destined to fuel an empire now risked falling into enemy hands. A new strategy was urgently needed, one shrouded in secrecy, forged in ruthlessness, and steeped in shadows. The man chosen to execute this mission was none other than General Tomoyuki Yamashita, feared, revered, and respected as one of Japan's most formidable military minds. Nicknamed the Tiger of Malaya, Yamashita had already earned legendary status. In 1941, with shocking speed and surgical precision, his troops tore down the Malayan Peninsula and forced the surrender of the British stronghold of Singapore. The fall of Singapore, long considered impregnable, marked one of the most humiliating defeats in British military history. Yamashita emerged not merely as a commander, but as a myth in motion. But now his battlefield had shifted from open combat to hidden war. His mission was no longer to conquer cities, but to vanish treasure. As Allied forces closed in, Yamashita turned his attention to the Philippines, where vast quantities of looted gold and precious artifacts had been stored. He devised a plan so audacious it seemed like fiction, to hide the treasure across the Philippine archipelago in a network of secret vaults, booby-trapped caves, and impenetrable jungle redoubts. A total of 175 sites were selected, each chosen for its remoteness, its natural concealment, and its strategic obscurity. Under the code name Golden Lily, the operation began. Deep tunnels were carved into mountainsides. Vaults were reinforced with concrete and steel. Intricate traps were installed, chambers rigged with poison gas, pressure-triggered grenades, false corridors, and drowning pits. The very air inside these tombs seemed designed to kill. But it wasn't just brute force and engineering that protected the treasure. Yamashita's brilliance lay in his use of deception and linguistic secrecy. Detailed maps were created, but not in modern Japanese. Instead, they were encoded in Koji, an ancient, nearly forgotten dialect filled with esoteric symbols and references known only to a handful of scholars and military elite. Without intimate knowledge of this archaic script, the maps were useless, like keys made for a door no one knew existed. To build these fortresses of fortune, Yamashita used forced labor. Prisoners of war, enslaved civilians, and local workers were conscripted under brutal conditions. Most never lived to see the outside world again. Once a site was completed, witnesses were systematically executed. Only a select circle of officers carried the knowledge forward, loyal unto death. As the war dragged on and Allied forces landed in the Philippines in October 1944, time began to slip away. Battles grew bloodier. Yamashita withdrew into the dense mountain ranges of Luzon, overseeing the final stages of the Golden Lily plan from hiding. Ships carrying treasure were scuttled, sunk deliberately in coastal waters. Vaults were sealed in haste. By April 1945, Japan's defeat was a certainty, but Yamashita had one final chilling act to perform. Of the 175 treasure sites, 174 had been successfully completed. The last remained unfinished, its secrets still known to the engineers working within. In an ultimate act of loyalty to emperor and mission, Yamashita ordered it sealed. The engineers, trusted but dangerous, were buried alive, taking their knowledge with them into eternal silence. The final vault, it was said, would remain untouched until Japan returned in triumph. The war ended soon after, and Yamashita was captured, tried, and executed by the Allies. Yet his legend endured, growing darker with each passing decade. Rumors of vast treasure hidden beneath the Philippine jungle emerged. Stories whispered by locals, pursued by treasure hunters, denied by governments. To this day, the tale of Yamashita's gold remains a tantalizing enigma, its truths buried beneath layers of myth, blood, and jungle roots. Is the treasure real? Perhaps. Perhaps not. But in the humid silence of the forest, beneath moss-covered stones and behind rusted steel doors, the ghost of a golden empire still waits. Chai, the enigmatic legacy of Yamashita's gold, a treasure cloaked in shadows. In the tangled green heart of the Philippine archipelago, where fog clings to the trees like forgotten memories, and the earth holds its secrets with a jealous grip, there is a story that refuses to die. It lingers like a ghost in the mist, passed from lips to ears in hushed tones and knowing glances. It is the story of Yamashita's gold, a legend that shimmers just beyond the grasp of certainty, beckoning the brave, the foolish, and the obsessed alike. This tale is not born of fairy tales or idle folklore. It is forged in the crucible of war and empire, born from blood, ambition, and the final desperate acts of a vanquished force. In the waning days of World War II, as American forces closed in and Japan's imperial dreams crumbled, whispers began to circulate of a treasure so vast it defied imagination. Gold, jewels, priceless artifacts, and sacred relics looted from across Asia. The hoard was said to have been transported to the Philippines, a strategic Japanese stronghold, and buried deep in its unforgiving terrain. At the center of this enduring mystery was General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the infamous Tiger of Malaya. A brilliant and ruthless commander, Yamashita was known for his rapid and devastating conquest of British Malaya and Singapore. But when the tide of war turned, he found himself stationed in the Philippines, tasked with defending the territory in Japan's final days. It was here, legend claims, that Yamashita oversaw, or at the very least became associated with, the concealment of an enormous treasure. When the war ended in 1945, Yamashita was captured and put on trial by a U.S. military tribunal. His prosecution was swift and controversial, focusing not on direct orders he gave, but on the atrocities committed under his command. Despite his calm assertion, absolutely not. When asked if he had ordered the killing of civilians, he was convicted and sentenced to death by hanging. His execution came just months later, and with it, any confirmed knowledge of the treasure's location was seemingly lost forever. But perhaps Yamashita was not the only keeper of the secret. Shadowed behind the legend is a more elusive figure, Prince Yasuhito Chichibu, the younger brother of Emperor Hirohito. Cloaked in secrecy and rumor, Prince Chichibu is said to have led a covert operation known as Golden Lily, a top-secret imperial program designed to plunder and transport Asia's wealth back to Japan. Some believe he was directly involved in coordinating the burial of the looted treasure in the Philippines, using a complex network of tunnels and booby-trapped vaults. When the prince died in 1953 of tuberculosis, any secrets he held were buried with him, deepening the mystery. What followed was not silence, but obsession. In the decades since the war, the myth of Yamashita's gold has become a kind of national ghost in the Philippines, an echo that refuses to fade. The story is more than a legend. It is part of the cultural soil, carried in lullabies, barroom tales, and ancestral lore. Stories abound of families who inherited strange maps, of men who emerged from the jungle with tales of glowing tunnels and deadly traps, of lives destroyed and fortunes made. Treasure hunters, adventurers, mercenaries, and even former soldiers have all taken up the call. Armed with metal detectors, hand-drawn charts, or visions granted in dreams, they have carved through mountainsides and churches, torn through jungles, and tunneled into history. In some cases, explosives were used to breach sealed chambers, some yielding Japanese weapons, skeletons in officers' uniforms, and relics that hint at truth buried beneath myth. But no universally acknowledged discovery of the main treasure hoard has ever been confirmed. Numerous lawsuits and international intrigue have surrounded the treasure's potential discovery. One of the most famous involved Roger Roxas, a Filipino locksmith turned treasure hunter who in the 1970s claimed to have found part of Yamashita's gold, specifically a golden Buddha statue and several gold bars. He accused then President Ferdinand Marcos of stealing the find. Roxas's allegations led to a protracted legal battle that extended into the United States courts, where Marcos's regime was eventually found liable. But the treasure itself? Still missing. Still myth. Skeptics argue that the entire legend may be a fabrication, wartime propaganda, or a collective hallucination born from greed and desperation. Yet others point to the sheer amount of gold that vanished from occupied territories during Japan's imperial expansion, gold that has never been accounted for. In the end, what Yamashita's gold represents may be more than a quest for wealth. It is a mirror of human longing, of the relentless drive to unearth truth from myth, to rewrite the final chapter of a war not entirely finished. Whether or not the gold exists, the pursuit itself has become a kind of inheritance, of risk, of dreams, of stories passed down like a curse wrapped in glittering promise. For many, the treasure is not measured in ingots or jewels, but in the echo of footsteps deep in the jungle, in the rustle of leaves over forgotten paths, and in the eternal question whispered to the earth, what if it's still out there? Whispers beneath the earth, the treasure that haunted a generation. In the mist-veiled highlands of northern Luzon, where pine forests sweep the ridges and old war ruins whisper to the wind, a legend has taken root so deeply that it pulses like a heartbeat in the souls of those who live there. It is not just a tale passed from grandfather to grandson, it is an obsession, a ghost story with teeth. And at the center of this mythos is not a general or a soldier, but a boy named Roger, who would grow into a man chasing shadows beneath the soil. The story begins not with gold, but with ashes. The year was 1943. The Philippines was aflame under the crushing weight of Japanese occupation. Cities were burning, families torn apart, and across the islands, hope had turned to dust. The capital, Manila, was savaged by war, left gutted in a way only rivaled by Warsaw during the entire Second World War. It was into this ravaged world that a child named Roger, later known more commonly as Roger Roxas, was born, unaware that his life would become entangled with one of the most enduring legends of the modern era, the fabled Yamashita's gold. From his earliest days, Roger was surrounded not only by hardship, but also by stories. Dark, glittering tales of untold treasure buried in secret vaults by the Japanese during their hasty retreat from the islands. These weren't bedtime stories meant to soothe. They were prophecies, folklore etched into the cultural memory of a people left impoverished and hollowed out by war. Roger, a locksmith by trade and dreamer by fate, took those whispers seriously. Raised in Baguio, a mountain city shrouded in mist and mystery, where General Tomoyuki Yamashita is said to have made his last stand, Roger grew up with more than just scars of war around him. He inherited an invisible map written in rumor and memory. The sheer logic of it haunted him. If gold was truly hidden, it would be near where Yamashita's forces were last known to operate. That made Baguio not just home, it made it a target of faith. While others heard stories and shook their heads, Roger acted. He spent decades following breadcrumbs, digging where he could, marking where he couldn't, crossing off every possibility with quiet resolve. He saved every peso he could from locksmithing jobs, just to buy equipment, his most prized being a second-hand metal detector. With it, he wandered through forests, hillsides, and abandoned bunkers, uncovering relics of war, rusted ammunition, rotted canteens, old coins. Not gold, not yet, but close enough to keep believing. And that belief? it never wavered. Because for Roger, the treasure was no longer just about riches. It was proof. Proof that the suffering had a secret purpose. Proof that legends weren't just stories. Proof that his life, and those of countless others in post-war poverty, still had a hidden key waiting to unlock everything. And then, one day in 1961, just when hope might have flickered into resignation, Roger found something that changed everything. A map. Not just any map. This one came with whispers of authenticity, tied to a Japanese soldier, marked in an elusive language of symbols and riddles. Roger didn't know it yet, but he was standing at the edge of a much deeper mystery, one that would test not just his mind or resolve, but the very line between faith and madness. A hidden rival and the hunt for gold. In the late 1960s, a man named Roger Roxas was chasing a dream that many would call impossible. He believed he could find a secret treasure buried somewhere in the jungles of the Philippines. This treasure wasn't just any ordinary fortune. It was said to be part of Yamashita's gold, a legendary hoard of looted gold and artifacts supposedly hidden by the Japanese army during World War II. Roger wasn't a professional archaeologist or a rich man with a large team behind him. He was just a humble locksmith from Baguio, with a deep passion for history and a burning belief that this treasure was real. He had gathered old maps, clues from wartime soldiers, and years of local stories to guide his search. But what Roger didn't know at the time was that he wasn't the only one looking for the treasure. And worse, his biggest competitor was someone who had much more power, influence, and resources than he could ever imagine. That man was Ferdinand Marcos, the president of the Philippines. In 1965, Marcos came to power through a democratic election. At first, many people believed he could bring positive change to the country, but it didn't take long for things to take a dark turn. Marcos became obsessed with wealth and control. He began using his position to gather power for himself and his family. To him, money wasn't just about living well. It was a way to dominate others. And when it came to money, few were greedier than Marcos, except perhaps his wife, Imelda. Imelda Marcos had a reputation for luxury. She loved shopping, wearing designer clothes, and collecting expensive things. According to some accounts, Marcos once took her to a secret bank vault and showed her massive piles of $100 bills just to impress her. Whether that story is true or not, one thing is clear. The couple's appetite for riches was nearly endless. For Marcos, finding Yamashita's gold wasn't just about money. It was about becoming the most powerful man in Asia. He had the government, the military, and endless financial resources at his fingertips. And compared to Roger, who had nothing but a map and determination, Marcos was playing the game on a whole different level. Using his political power, Marcos passed a law that required all treasure hunters in the Philippines to apply for official permits. On the surface, it looked like a way to manage archaeological efforts and protect cultural heritage. But in reality, it was a clever trick. Anyone who wanted to dig for treasure had to report the exact location of their dig site. That way, if someone happened to find something valuable, Marcos could swoop in and take control with a little effort. Unaware of the trap, Roger played by the rules. In 1970, now married and expecting a child, he felt even more urgency to find the treasure. He applied for a permit and submitted his plans. What he didn't realize was that his paperwork would go through none other than Marcos's own uncle. Roger had unknowingly stepped into a dangerous game, a game where power, greed, and gold collided. With little money and a dream in his heart, he headed into the jungle, hoping to uncover one of the greatest treasures in history. But now, with powerful eyes watching his every move. The fall of a treasure hunter. Roger's defiance against a dictator. One fateful night changed everything for Roger. What started as a triumphant discovery soon spiraled into a battle against a powerful regime. Roger had uncovered something extraordinary, a treasure so significant it would echo through the highest levels of power. News of his miraculous find quickly reached the presidential palace, sparking a reaction that would alter his life forever. One can imagine the storm it stirred within President Marcos, a man who thrived on power and control. Knowing such a treasure existed and wasn't in his possession would have driven him to desperate lengths. For Marcos, there was no question. The Buddha would be his, and it would eventually rest inside his palace. But the method he chose was anything but diplomatic. On the early morning of April 5, 1971, Roger's home became the target of a violent visit. Mysterious men arrived without warning, pounding on the door with threats that left no room for negotiation. They gave him just 3 minutes to open up, or be shot. Faced with such terror, panic must have overwhelmed Roger. It's hard to fathom the fear of hearing such threats echo through your home in the dead of night. But what followed was even more devastating. The intruders seized everything: his discovery, his proof, his dream. A lifetime of searching had ended in theft and betrayal. Despite this violation, Roger didn't yield. Reporting the crime to the authorities seemed like the only option. But by then, Marcos held a firm grip on both the police and the military. Yet one weapon still remained out of his reach: the press. In the days that followed, media outlets began to unravel the story. The scandal exploded across headlines, painting Marcos not as a president, but as a thief of wartime plunder. These reports couldn't have come at a worse time for the president. Already under fire for blatantly rigging his second-term election, a win by an improbable 2 million votes, Marcos was drowning in allegations of corruption. Public scrutiny intensified, and his control began to slip. Rather than risk a direct assassination, which would only spark more backlash, Marcos shifted tactics. Weeks later, Roger received word that his precious Buddha had been recovered and was waiting at a courthouse in Baguio. But when he arrived, the truth was clear. This was not his Buddha. The color, the shape, the expression, everything was wrong. Even the detachable head, a distinctive feature of the original, was missing. It was a crude substitute. Marcos clearly expected Roger to accept the fake quietly, but he misjudged the man's resolve. In a bold and dangerous move, Roger rejected the forgery outright. This wasn't just a refusal, it was a public challenge to the president himself. In the face of intimidation, Roger's defiance lit a fire that would mark him as a target. Just over 2 weeks later, masked agents returned. This time, their methods were far more brutal. Captured and held in secret, Roger was subjected to relentless torture, beatings, cigarette burns, electric shocks. Under unimaginable pressure, he eventually signed a statement clearing Marcos of wrongdoing and gave up the location of the remaining gold. By the time he surrendered the truth, Roger was a shadow of the man he had been. Publicly silenced, privately destroyed, he had no choice but to watch as Marcos took the rest of his treasure. His fight had ended, not with justice, but with oppression. A stark reminder of the cost of confronting tyranny in a land where power answered to no one. 7. The rise and fall of Marcos, greed, gold, and the price of truth. By 1986, Ferdinand Marcos's obsession with power and wealth, dubbed by many as megamania, had ultimately led to his downfall. A massive popular uprising forced Marcos and his wife Imelda to flee the Philippines, seeking exile in Hawaii. When the Filipino people stormed Malacanang Palace, the presidential residence, they were stunned by what they uncovered: lavish treasures, priceless works of art, and over 3,000 pairs of shoes, just a glimpse of what the Marcoses had accumulated and left behind. Marcos had become, by many accounts, one of the richest men on earth. Their fortune was so vast that even they seemed unsure how to spend it all. For most Filipinos, the source of such extraordinary wealth was no mystery. Decades of rampant corruption, embezzlement, and abuse of power had allowed Marcos to use the national treasury as his own personal vault. His presidency, it seemed, was little more than a facade for personal gain. Years later, during a trial for corruption and fraud, Imelda Marcos claimed that their fortune came not from theft, but from an incredible discovery: the fabled Yamashita's gold. The story provided a convenient smokescreen, an unprovable tale that deflected accusations and played on myth. But for Roger Roxas, the man who claimed to have discovered that very treasure, such claims were salt in a deep wound. Roger's life was torn apart after his discovery. Following his arrest and brutal torture, he lost his fortune, his health, and his family. The injuries left him blind in one eye, and he never recovered fully, physically or emotionally. Yet even in despair, Roger's determination endured. With Marcos in exile, Roger bravely filed a lawsuit against him in the United States. Despite Marcos's death in 1989, the case continued, a testament to Roger's resilience and sense of justice. In 1996, Roger achieved a bittersweet victory. A U.S. jury awarded him a record-breaking $43 million, affirming that Marcos had indeed stolen his treasure. However, Roger never lived to see this triumph. He died just before the ruling at the age of 49. 2 years later, the compensation award was overturned, though no court ever disputed that Marcos had taken what wasn't his. Roger's story remains one of courage and tragedy. Despite losing everything, he stood firm against one of the world's most powerful dictators. His fight raises an enduring question: was Roger's discovery truly unique, or are more vaults, like the legendary Yamashita treasure, still hidden beneath the Philippine soil, waiting to be found? The legend of Yamashita's treasure in the Philippines is more than a fairy tale. It's a living truth waiting to be revealed. Despite the danger, despite knowing that not everyone is lucky, seekers still dream of the golden light hidden deep in the ground. Because the treasure is still there, defying time and man. Who knows? You might be the one to write the next chapter of this legend. If you find this story interesting, don't forget to like the video and comment your thoughts below. Do you believe that Yamashita's treasure still exists? We'd love to hear from you.